Hello, and welcome back to the I'm Done Dieting Now What podcast, where we talk about how to go from binging, obsessed, and feeling out of control with food to intuitive, joyful, and spontaneous, where food no longer takes up so much energy and brain space. I'm your host, Michaela, registered dietitian and body image coach, and today we are going to talk about binge eating. So I know that binge eating was something I struggled with, and I know it is something that a lot of you struggle with as well. So today I'm going to talk about what binge eating is, why it happens, and give you a few tips on how to break the binge cycle. So first and foremost, let's dive into what is binge eating. So binge eating is basically consuming a large amount of food in a short period of time while feeling out of control and unable to stop. And so typically it happens when you're by yourself. It happens really fast. And, the types of food that you do binge on, it doesn't always have to be your off limits bad food. It can be any food. And I do want to reiterate that because a lot of times, we think that, it's typically only off limits food. No, it can be carrots, it can be broccoli. It just depends where you're at in your disordered eating of like some people who experience orthorexia, which is an obsession with eating clean and healthy foods. They will find themselves binging on things like broccoli, apples, because the fear of those off-limits foods are too great. So the food does not matter. It's just that eating large amounts of food in one sitting and feeling that out of control urge. And ultimately, why it happens, there are two main camps as to why binge eating happens. One is the emotional trigger camp, which is things like stress, sadness, and past traumas. Food and binge eating is how you coped. Or it is the restrictive eating that led to the feelings of deprivation. And it can be a mixture of both, but typically those are the two camps. And from what I see, it is typically a mixture of both of those things. So binge eating is something that I struggled with tremendously back in my disordered eating days, and I know it is something that many of you struggle with as well. So today I'm going to talk about what binging is exactly, why it happens, and giving you some tips on how to move through it, as well as sharing my personal experience with it to give you some insight on, how it looks and how you can heal from it. I know in my binge eating struggles, I felt very alone. It was 10 years ago when binging wasn't even a word I knew. So it was very lonely, very isolating. And so I'm hoping to bring some light to it as well as just continue talking about it. So let's get on into what exactly is binge eating. So binge eating is basically consuming a large amount of food in a short period of time with feelings of out of controlness and unable to stop. So typically it happens by yourself. You're eating a lot of foods that either you deem as off limits or it can be foods that you deem as healthy. It does not matter. Binge eating happens either way. And it's about a whole day's worth of food in one sitting. And it's fast. Again, you're doing it by yourself and it does not feel good. And afterwards you feel physically sick. And so why this happens is a few different reasons. So it could be from emotional triggers like stress or sadness, but also a coping mechanism from past traumas. And then also restrictive and dieting behaviors that lead to the feelings of deprivation. So it can be both emotions, it can be restriction in terms of dieting, and then it can be both of them. So there's many reasons why binge eating happens. So there's no one size fits all of, okay, this is why you binge, right? It could be multiple reasons. It could be a mixture of both. But knowing that typically what I see is that it is more from the restrictive dieting behaviors and then exacerbated by the emotions. So, if you cope with food, restricting is only going to make that coping mechanism feel more extreme and worse. So that is what binge eating is and why it happens. So I know that binge eating was something I struggled with, and I know it is something that a lot of you struggle with as well. So today I'm going to talk about what binge eating is, why it happens, and give you a few tips on how to break the binge cycle. So first and foremost, let's dive into what is binge eating. So binge eating is basically consuming a large amount of food in a short period of time while feeling out of control and unable to stop. And so typically it happens when you're by yourself. It happens really fast. And, the types of food that you do binge on, it doesn't always have to be your off limits bad food. It can be any food. And I do want to reiterate that because a lot of times, uh, we think that, oh, it's typically only off limits food. No, it can be carrots, it can be broccoli. It just depends where you're at in your disordered eating of like some people who experience orthorexia, which is an obsession with eating clean and healthy foods. They will find themselves binging on things like broccoli, apples, because the fear of those off limits foods are too great. So the food does not matter. It's just that eating large amounts of food in one sitting and feeling that out of control urge. And ultimately, why it happens, there are two main camps as to why binge eating happens. One is the emotional trigger camp, which is things like stress, sadness, and past traumas. Food and binge eating is how you coped. Or it is the restrictive eating that led to the feelings of deprivation. And it can be a mixture of both, but typically those are the two camps. And from what I see, it is typically a mixture of both of those things. And so here's an example of how binge eating used to show up for me. So, back in my dieting days, my restrictive days, it's like there was something that just switched. For a little bit, I was really good at restricting, really good at controlling myself. And then all of a sudden, I would get into these cycles of I would eat so well and healthfully for a few days. I wouldn't have any sweets. I would just have, a handful of dark chocolate. I would eat veggies and fruit and protein. I wouldn't eat much bread. I would kind of go to bed hungry. And then Thursday would roll around. I would come home and it would be late at night. And instead of preparing, a balanced dinner, I would head straight to the kitchen and start eating whatever I could find. It was the cookies, the chips, the ice cream, and if I didn't have anything at home, on my way home, it's like I knew the lid was going to pop off. So I would go home, or on my way home, I would stop by the grocery store and I'd grab things. I would just eat, and I would eat anything that would provide a temporary sense of comfort because it was the end of the week. My willpower was out. My discipline was out. I was exhausted. And you know what? It tasted good. So I just couldn't stop. And it's like all that self control went out the window. And of course, this was later in the evening. So I was completely alone in my room. And, I would eat. And as I would eat, I would feel this mix of emotions. And initially, there was a sense of relief because the food was good and it did feel numb. It numbed me from the stress and anxiety that I was feeling, but also it was like, oh, okay, I can breathe again. And it tasted good at first, but then as I continued, that's when the guilt and the shame started creeping in. And then it started to not feel good, but I kept eating anyway. So despite what I was feeling, I couldn't stop. It was almost automatic. And I still remember a few of my binges to this day. But when I got to the point where I was uncomfortable and I thought I'd be sick, that is when I would stop. And that's when the shame got really loud. And I would go straight to, okay, how do I fix this? And every time it was a bit different, just depending on, the weekend plans that weekend. Sometimes I'd be like, screw it, just indulge through the rest of the weekend, like then get back on track Monday. Other times I would try to be better the next day. And if I felt truly terrible, I would end up canceling plans the next day. So, this cycle of like Monday through Thursday being good and then, weekends being like insane, I would eat everything, happened for a while. This went on for a few years. And what was interesting was that it would come in waves. Like sometimes I would get a handle on it and a few weeks would go by and I would do really good. And then something would trigger me and it would get really bad again. I was kind of like a diet in a way of I'd be really good and then I'd fall off and then be really good and then fall off and then it'd get really bad. And it was just it was a chaotic time. And again, this was a time where binge eating was not a thing. I just thought I lacked self-control and I had a problem. So looking back, that is how I experienced binge eating. And you may experience binge eating a little bit differently, and that's okay. That's normal. We're all different with our binge eating experiences, but it's the same theme. It's you start eating, you can't stop. The shame, the guilt, it overwhelms you. And then afterwards, you're left with feeling so uncomfortable, so guilty that the only way you know how to fix it is to be better, to be good again. And the cycle continues. And, when I look back to that period of time in my life, it costed me so much. I was constantly thinking about food. I remember this one specific dinner, my friends asked me to go to dinner. And I remember that day. It was this one day, my senior year of high school. And I literally was like, okay, today I need to make sure I'm good all day. I don't eat too much. I was planning out my day. And then, then I would look at the menu and we were going to Carrabba's that night. And I was like, okay, I'm going to get the salad and this if everyone else is being good. And then I'll get the chicken parm if everyone's being bad. Because also that comparison eating and not wanting to eat the bad thing while everyone else was eating salads or whatnot was also a big thing for me. But that experience, I just remember I was not present with my friends. And that was a big moment for me of like, this is really bad. This is not normal and this is not good. Because I was so in my head and I did not enjoy myself. I remember ending up, everyone got like something super kind of healthy-ish. So I ended up getting the salad, and on my way home, I went by the store and I told them, "Oh, I can't go out tonight." And I went home and I just ate. And that was a really low point for me. It's still a core memory and it was exhausting. So I just want to let you know if you are currently in that situation or you have been in the past, you're not alone. And the struggle is real. So I never thought my problems were bad enough. I thought I should be able to figure this out on my own. It's just food. So there was even shame there. So it was a lot. It was a lot in my life during that time. And it wasn't until I went to college and I was like, ooh, this is not right. I remember Googling lack of self-control around food. And I remember Overeaters Anonymous popping up and Weight Watchers and all these things. And I was like, no, I can't do it. I'm like, I've tried it. It does not work. I'm like, there's got to be something else. So I remember as I was Googling, went down and I found a dietitian. And so that was when I took that leap of faith and I was like, okay, let me call, let me see what this is about. I didn't even know I knew it was like a nutritionist dietitian, but even then I didn't know what I was getting myself into. And that is the moment that changed my life forever because she is the person who introduced me to intuitive eating and helped me break the binge cycle. And so that's a little bit about my story and my journey whenever it comes to how I was struggling with binge eating and what kind of happened, how it all played out. But if you are struggling, again, I want you to know you're not alone and that everyone's struggle looks a little bit different, but it's all the same rhythm. And so now I want to get into, okay, well, now how do you break this cycle? If you are in a restrict binge cycle or even a overeating cycle, it's the same thing on a smaller scale. But the first thing I want you to know is there's no one size fits all approach because binge eating can happen for different reasons and breaking that binge cycle involves addressing the root causes. And everyone's root causes are a little bit different. Everyone's personality is a little bit different, which means you will need different things to heal. And a few examples of this is, your dieting history is different from other people's, the ways you restrict, your trauma, growing up in a household where food was scarce, the coping mechanisms that you've developed, all those things play a role in your relationship with food. And so, again, your root causes are going to be different from everyone else's. So your journey is going to be different. But what I'm going to tell you are the 5 things that helped me heal and that also are pretty general ways that I've helped my clients heal. But again, with every one of these things, there's a different tool, there's a different way, it doesn't have to be this way. So I just want to reemphasize that. And so for me, number one, and for my clients, it's always building awareness. So recognizing triggers, emotions, and patterns around your binge eating. That is going to be crucial because you can't change anything that you're not aware of. So you want to build awareness around what is going on. Create that awareness. And I know it's hard because you just want to escape because it doesn't feel good. The cycle, the rules, but we have to open up that door and say, what is going on here? So that's number one. Number two is that once you have awareness, you'll understand what's going on, what's happening. And so typically, like I said before, is the reason why binge eating happens is due to restriction, whether that be mental or physical. And we can't target the emotional piece without first making sure that you're fed and that restriction is not there anymore, which means that step two, eating more throughout the day. 9 times out of 10, I can tell you, you're probably not eating enough throughout the day, especially if your binges happen at night. So step two would be making sure you're eating meals and snacks consistently throughout the day. Number three is what you want. So eating what you want. And that's where the food rules, the black and white mentality, the scarcity comes in of, but I can't have more than 3 cookies or, all those things. Or I shouldn't have cookies, I should have something healthier, or I can't have cake for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. All those little rules start to pop in and those fears start to come in, which is why number 3 is important of eating what you want, but also shifting your mindset, which means that I'm going to give myself permission to have waffles for breakfast. I'm going to give myself permission to have a sandwich for lunch with chips. I'm going to give myself permission to have a snack in between lunch and dinner. And that snack is going to be some Reese's. I'm going to give myself permission to have a dinner that I actually like. And, it doesn't have to be like the scariest thing, like a bowl of pasta. It can be, I'm going to have chicken parm. And I'm going to have a salad on the side to make it a little bit safer, right? There's no one size fits all to how you break food rules. And sometimes you do need that safety. So this is where that individualized piece comes in. But what I'm trying to say is eating more throughout the day and eating things that you want and breaking those rules and moving towards the gray and creating that abundance, because the reason why binge eating happens is because of the restriction and not giving yourself permission to have foods that you deem as bad or off limits in the amount that you want them. So that is number 3. And then number 4 is coping mechanisms. So basically, after you finish eating, that is when let's say you break a food rule and you're done eating and you feel full and that shame and that guilt is bubbling up, right? There needs to be a game plan of, what are you going to do when that happens? Because that is where you would run to restriction again, and that would just create the whole cycle or keep it going. So you want coping mechanisms in place so that you can feel anchored and not run to restriction. So that's a very important one. And then 5 is time, practice, and support. The road to breaking free from the binge cycle, it's bumpy. It is not linear. And, it's going to be messy, and that's okay. That is okay. It takes time, it takes practice, it takes support. And I know one thing that I needed is that I couldn't do it by myself. I did not think I deserved to give myself permission. I needed someone else to give me that permission to have the cake, have the waffles, have the sandwich. And so by having that dietitian, that is what helped me actually break my food rules, because I had no idea what I was doing. I was like, yeah, but I can't do that. How do I break this food rule? How do I not feel guilty? And she's the one who helped me open up those tabs of okay, well, let's explore this. And I never would have done that if it wasn't for her telling me I could do it and giving me that permission. So it's also about finding what you need. And I think that is another important piece of this. So those are 5 steps to break the binge cycle. Now, with that being said, I want to address a few realistic expectations to set while you do this. And that's that you are not going to go from binge eating. So let's say you binge at least once a week to binge free. That's impossible. Uh, what is actually going to happen is the frequency of your binges are going to lessen over time. That means like you may have a binge once a month. You may have a lot of overeating sessions in between that, right? It's not going to be linear. It's not going to be from binge eating to nothing. It's going to lessen over time, and it's going to be a little bit of a bumpy road. So that is a realistic expectation to set. And I know it's not sexy. I know it's not what you want to hear, but that's the reality of healing. And the more realistic we are with ourselves, the more we won't feel like a failure while we're doing this. So really want you to try to set those realistic expectations, because healing, again, it's messy. Like I talk about the messy middle all the time. And so actually it was interesting. The other day I was talking with one of my clients. We were in our one-on-one session, and she was talking, it had been a few months, and I was like, when's the last time you binged? And she was like, oh my gosh, I can't even remember. And I was like, good, that's what we want, because that is what healing is about. It's those small changes that you don't even notice, and then you notice in reverse. So after time has passed, it's like, wait, I don't do that anymore. That is what sustainable changes are all about. Those small changes that end up being big changes that you don't even notice because it is becoming ingrained and habitual. It's not something you have to work hard at. And that is the ultimate goal here. And so that is all I have for you today. I hope this information was helpful. I hope some of these steps are things that you can start to implement and start to become aware of as you begin to heal. And just know that if you are trying to heal your relationship with food and break the binge cycle, you're not alone. And if you are stuck, it is okay to ask for help. Sometimes whenever we're trying to heal, and there seems to be a missing piece, like something is not clicking, and you keep finding yourself stuck back in the binge cycle time and time again. It may be time to ask for help, because sometimes when you find that guidance to help you see, okay, why are you getting stuck, and what do you need to do about it, and someone's there to give you the tools to break the cycle, that all or nothing mindset, and connect back with your body, and then that support that helps you not feel alone. And when you're in those down moments of you just overate, or you're just wanting to run back to a restriction, you have someone to be like, hey, it's okay, I got you, and help you through that so you don't fall back to that restriction. That is when the healing magic can happen, and where you're able to break the binge cycle, move through the messy middle, and find that intuitive, joyful, and peaceful relationship with food in your body, so that you can be present with family and friends. You can go out to eat and not worry or have to look at the menu before. You can go on vacation and not stress about the food, when, what, and how much you're going to eat, because that is your human right, and that is what you deserve. That is what health and happiness is all about. So if this is you, this is exactly what I do provide for you in my one-on-one food and body peace program. And right now I have one more one-on-one spot available for May. So if you are interested, I would love to help you. I would love to support you. Just head to the link in the show notes to learn more. And so that is all. Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe. Please leave a review. So until next time, here's to making peace with food and honoring your body. Bye, everyone.